everybody. I would like to do a Zoom presentation for you to help you understand Lesson Plan 1. And I'll try to do this for each of the 12 lesson plans for the semester. And so what I'd like to do is show you what Lesson Plan 1 looks like on Canvas. I'm getting a couple emails today from students saying, where do I find the material and so forth. So it's pretty simple. So let's do the share screen. And let's go to the course right here, and here is the home page. And I thought in the orientation I kind of showed you on the left side you're going to find modules. So make sure you click on the modules. I think most of you have located the course, but modules is where you want to click every time. And when you go into modules, you'll see this is more like the syllabus, due dates, help forum, etc., introduction to your classmates. A lot of you are introducing yourselves. That's excellent. So that is coming up right now. So I'm sure you guys have all found where the modules are, but some students are asking me, not necessarily in this class, I teach I teach 2 classes just now. I just finished up the finals for 3 of them. So I have 2 more late term. And for lesson plan 1, you're gonna locate it here. And this is the introduction to ethics. And then lesson plan 2 will start on Monday, and that will be ethical heroes. And that is kind of a cool topic to look at, where we look at examples of ethical heroes. So let's click on lesson plan 1. And when you open that up, it's going to open up to the notes. And I'm going to scroll down just to show you what I have here for the lesson plan. So the notes, and this is just general notes that if you were sitting in my class, I would be covering a lot of these main concepts and we'd be discussing them. And then it's going to scroll down, and I don't have a ton of notes for you. The reason why is I don't want it to be overwhelming. I want just the highlights, and that's why I highlighted in yellow for you, just the key highlights we're going to be talking about. The professor's presentation what I'm doing right now, will go there. Required readings is you click on that link, it will open up. Required films, you click on that link, it'll open up, and then your post question. So I probably will open these up soon enough. I just want to go up here to the top and just start talking about some of this material here. So first of all, this is a philosophy course, and philosophy, the word itself means love of wisdom. Philosophia. Philo is love and Sophia is wisdom, so the love of wisdom. And philosophy traditionally has 3 main branches with a lot of sub-branches. And if you were taking an introduction to philosophy course, if you had one, you would learn these 3 main branches. And the first branch is called ontology, which is the study of reality, asking questions like what is real, what is not real? Is there anything beyond the physical world? Is there a metaphysical world? Questions like that. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, asking questions like, how do we gain knowledge? Are we born with it? Is it innate, or do we learn it? Is it nurture versus nature? Those kind of questions. And then we have this branch here, which is called axiology. And I'm going to turn my phone off, it's making a sound. Axiology is the study of value. And here we will find ethics, moral value, political value, artistic value, or aesthetics. So in axiology is where we find the field of ethics or moral value, and I say it right here. And just to give you a hint, when I highlight something pretty important like that, you're going to probably see a question on that. Of which branch does ethics fall under? And I might give you ontology, epistemology, axiology, and I might throw in some other sub-branches, but what you'd be connecting ethics with is axiology, the study of value. Now the word ethics itself is a Greek word, ethos, which means character. It's the concept of building one's character. I think that's a really cool understanding of ethics. Sometimes you hear the word morality as well. We call this an ethics course, not a morality course, because morality almost sounds like I'm going to suggest how for you to live your life, and it's not about that at all. But morality is a Latin word that comes from moralis, or customs, or manners, or actions. So understanding the word ethics, we'll check that one off and move to some words here that you might run across in an ethics course, such as this one. So we might hear the word amoral, and amoral is exactly what it sounds. It's having no moral sense, no moral concepts, lacking in morality. And then non-moral, and non-moral is not amoral. Non-moral is it's totally out of the realm of morality. So an example of something non-moral, okay, would be my pen here. This is not even, unless I'm using it as a weapon, it itself is out of the realm of morality. So not everything fits in the moral realm, okay? So here we go. what are the three main branches or approaches that are utilized in ethics? And this is very important. These three main branches, I have a little article for you to read on that. It's very short. It's actually from a much longer article, but I just copied and pasted certain sections for you. And let's start with the first. So meta-ethics or descriptive ethics, and it's exactly what it is. Descriptive, it's describing, not prescribing. When I say the word prescriptive ethics, I'm really kind of recommending something for you. I'm suggesting like a prescription, like take this medicine to get better. So I'm prescribing how to act and behave in the world. And that's one area of ethics, okay? And some ethical philosophers are prescriptive ethical philosophers. But descriptive, it's more philosophical. We're asking more objective questions like, what do we mean by the word ethics? And what do we mean by the word morality? And we might defining ethical terms, or we are really more taking a second approach analysis of it, not a first approach where I'm suggesting something, but almost like stepping back and analyzing it. And so descriptive ethics, it's more the philosophical questions that we're going to ask in ethics, okay? Where prescriptive would be the positions of some of the ethical theorists you'll run across, where they're actually suggesting, you know, how to live your life. And an example of prescriptive ethics, we'll run into several in this class, but one might be even the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has very clear-cut prescriptives. His goal is to become happy. We learn that in lesson plan 2. And to become happy, we need to be compassionate human beings. So he's prescribing or suggesting to us the remedy to be happy. We'll run across prescriptive ethics when we cover Immanuel Kant's philosophy. I'm sorry, when I'm doing Zoom, I don't know if I look at the camera, like here, look where, okay. I just kind of look at the screen. When you study Immanuel Kant, he's prescribing for us how to live our life. And he suggests, he offers a philosophy called duty-based morality, that we as rational human beings should know what we should do. There's rights and wrongs, okay? And we should, it is our duty to follow what our rational brain is telling us what is right and what is, and avoid what is wrong. And so he's prescribing us to follow a sense of duty, follow a sense of, you know, moral integrity, and do the right thing, because he thinks there is such a thing as called the right thing. And then you're going to run across prescriptive ethics when you come across a philosopher. Now you're going to run across him a lot in this class, and that's because he's one of the most well-known ethical theorists today. His name is Peter Singer. We do cover a lot of his material in here. We'll cover him in lesson plan 1, and we won't cover him in the last couple lesson plans, but we will sprinkle throughout the semester, throughout this term. And his understanding is one of what's called utilitarianism or consequentialist ethics. Now, I just used a fancy word for you, so it just kind of fits perfectly together there. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist approach. What utilitarian, I'm sure you might have heard of this before, it's the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Peter Singer is using it in the idea of let us lessen the pain and suffering of others, okay, and consider those when we're making our moral decisions. So it's greatest happiness for the greatest number. It's not just quantity, it's also quality. It's about lessening pain and suffering, opting for a compassionate approach, and making sure it impacts, you know, the larger community. And so that is kind of a utilitarian approach. He's concerned with the consequences. He's not concerned with this, there is an inherent right or wrong. He's concerned with how actions really play out and the consequences of those actions. Now, he's a big spokesperson for animal welfare. So just you kind of will realize when we get to the animal welfare section, I think it's lesson plan 10, his name is going to come up a lot. He has a lot to say about that. He's concerned about the consequences of our actions and how it impacts other people of the world. And in that category of the other people, he even places animals. It's not just a human being. Somebody with personhood is somebody with consciousness, somebody with awareness, somebody with emotions and feelings, of which he attributes all to the animal world as well. So we will get into that later. Okay, so I'm trying to give you a kind of a glimpse of descriptive, which is the philosophical questions we ask. Normative ethics or prescriptive is the same thing. What are the norms of society of which we should live by? It's a should situation. It's a prescribing. And then we have applied ethics. And this is where we're looking at case topics. And there's so many cool case topics you can look at in an ethics course. And so, for instance, you could look at, I just mentioned animal welfare as one. You could look at environmental ethics. You could look at stem cell research. I have a lot in this class. I mean, euthanasia and abortion and all these very interesting case topics. And so anytime you're looking at a particular topic, and a lot of them are very current modern day topics, that fits under applied ethics. Okay, moving down here, the focus of ethics. Now this is an interesting one as I take my sip of tea just a second. It is the idea, and it's defined in your reading. I think I gave you a BBC article to read, very short, simple, very simple. Okay, I didn't start you off with anything hard on that one. BBC article explaining, you know, what is ethics and, you know, where the term comes from and what the word actually means and what's the focus of it, what are the branches of it. So the focus of ethics, so this is going to be an interesting one, and a lot of ethical theorists argue this, is the idea of going beyond yourself, going beyond yourself. So thinking of the other, that would be, for many of them, like Peter Singer, that is the focus of ethics. And even in the BBC article, it argued that. And so it's that idea of, it's not just about me, it's thinking about everybody besides myself and thinking about my actions and how my actions impact the world. And so this is where you're going to run across an idea, and it's going to be a theme through our entire term together, and it's the idea of a moral circle. Now, some students get tripped up on this. I hope I can define it as clear as possible for you. It's the idea that at the center of your thinking is yourself. And then what's beyond yourself? When you act in the world, who else are you thinking about and how it impacts them? If you're considering them in your actions, they're part of your moral circle. They're part of your moral consideration. They're part of your awareness that your actions impact them. And so when you choose to act in the world, you're making sure that your actions are cognizant and aware of how it's going to impact others and your moral circle. Well, how far we expand that moral circle out is a big question. Do we expand it out only to our immediate family, and we only think about our actions and how it impacts our immediate family? Do we think about how it impacts our community? Do we think about how our actions impact our state, our country, our world? Do we think about how our actions impact our planet, the environment? Do we think about how our actions impact, and this is going to seem like a weird one, the insect world? Do we think about how our actions impact the animal world? So the farther we expand out that moral circle, now this is an interesting, almost a prescription I'm going to be saying here. The argument is, from Dalai Lama and from Peter Singer and a lot of the other moral ethical theorists will argue that, the better off the individual is. The better off the individual is because the more greater sense of well-being one has, the greater sense of happiness one has, the more you move out of the I awareness to the other awareness, the better off one is. And this fits very nicely with the whole concept of developmental psychology. If you're a psych major, if you ever cover developmental psychology, you'll have the understanding there's various stages that one can go through. And we'll learn about the various moral stages that Lawrence Colbert talks about. He's kind of come up a little bit down on that sheet. Talks about how there's different stages that as one acts, as one's born into the world, you're at a certain moral stages, and ideally you develop and evolve to higher stages of morality. And why would you even want to do that? Because it's a more fulfilled, more enlightened, more aware, happier person. And so that would be the ultimate goal. I mean, philosophy is the love of wisdom. And it's not wisdom just for wisdom. Well, it is wisdom for wisdom's sake, but it also is the whole concept of the person that thinks and pursues wisdom lives a happier, more fulfilled life than those that don't. So it's the whole unexamined life is not worth living of Socrates concept. Okay, so this going beyond the self is the idea of expanding the moral circle. This is a very famous, I think he's famous because I study Eastern philosophy, but you may not know him, Vivekananda from India. The only definition that can be given of morality is this: that which is selfish is immoral, and that which is unselfish is moral. Now, you may not agree with that at all. Okay, that's fine, but just that it captures that whole concept of going beyond yourself. Okay, and again, I'm not presenting this class where you have to agree with all these ideas. I'm just kind of giving you the overall picture here. Okay, the 4 isms are found in the BBC article, the first reading assignment, and it talks about moral realism, subjectivism, emotivism, and prescriptivism. I've already really covered prescriptivism, but moral realism is the idea that there's just four different positions here. It's the idea that there are kind of moral truths. Like an example I think in the reading they gave is it's wrong to murder. It's just boom, wrong. There's a good and there's a bad, and it's wrong to murder. Subjectivism is more your personal perspective, and it's like, I think it's wrong to murder. You're not really saying it's an objective truth out there, but I don't like murder. I think it's wrong. Okay. And then emotivism is tapping into your emotions and saying, you know, murder's horrible. You know, it's more of an emotional argument. And what else did I want to say about emotion? It's expressing your emotions, like yuck, you know, murder's horrible or something like that. And then prescriptivism, I think it'd be a lot more than yuck. It would be, that's god awful. Prescriptivism is you're prescribing how to act in the world, and you're prescribing somebody not to commit murder. So these are just what are called the four ethical isms. So moral truth, subjective perspective, your emotions driving your ethical argument, and then this one you're prescribing how people should act and behave in the world. Okay, sources of ethics. This is where you're asking the question, like, where does ethics come from? And I don't mean so much the origins of ethics. We'll get into that when we look at what's called evolutionary ethics. But just this whole idea of like, what's the source of ethics? Now, one up here is called the supramundane origins of moral rules. This is the supernatural theory, and the idea that morals come from, and I'm sure you can guess it, come from the supernatural, come from a higher divine source, come from God, come from the goddess, come from the divine, come from Brahman, come from whatever, however you define the supernatural, that morals have a moral source from something higher. And then a challenge to that was a quote from Albert Einstein, okay? And his quote is, I do not believe in immorality of the individual, but I consider ethics to be an exclusive human concern with no supernatural authority behind it. And so when we study what's called evolutionary ethics, and that will be lesson plan, let me think here, lesson plan 5, it will challenge this whole supernatural explanation of morality. And we'll say ethics can be explained from an evolutionary perspective, and that animals themselves display moral behavior or a precursor to moral behavior, and they'll give an evolutionary explanation for it. And Darwin argued just that. He argued that human kindness, human love, human compassion has an evolutionary explanation. He thought it was ingrained within us to be like that. He had a very positive view of human nature, and he looked at ethics as having an evolutionary origin. Okay, then moving here is intuition, and it's the idea of our moral sense. We intuit, we naturally, instinctually sort of intuit. And then the challenge to that, like we intuit these more natural laws, these laws of morality, we intuit them. And a challenge to that I put here is Hegel. Now you may have never heard of Hegel, but if you have the idea that moral views change in time, then you wouldn't say there is like these moral natural laws that we can intuit, because they're always in a state of change, as this philosopher Hegel had pointed out. Consequentialism is utilitarianism. I just discussed that as an example of it. And consequentialism is really arguing that you should focus your attention on the consequences of the action, not whether there is a moral truth, because they say there isn't. It's more the consequences that matter. And the challenge to it is consequences as a moral basis are sometimes hard to assess. So some people have challenged that. Somebody like Immanuel Kant would challenge that. I mentioned him as believing there are moral truths we can know through reason, and it's not about the consequences. Sometimes it's just about doing the right thing in and of itself. Okay, non-consequentialist ethics would be arguing there are moral principles, moral truths, a challenge to it. How do we know what's right and wrong? Okay, Kant said we can use reason to determine that, but you know, that's a tough one, because everybody may define it very differently. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is kind of a cool concept. One of the philosophers we attribute it to is Aristotle. And he says, ethics is all about developing moral character in and of it for itself. No other reason to develop your moral character, develop your sense of virtue, to become a highly aware, philosophical human being. And the challenge to it is, how does one define moral excellence? So what I'm trying to do is show you the position and then the counter to it. Situation ethics, a unique context with no moral rules. Okay, so there's no moral rules. Each situation is its own, okay, and it's based on the context of the situation you're in. And a challenge to it, are there no universal standards then? And this I mentioned as ethics and political ideology, and I put Marx and Nietzsche there. I'm going to skip that for right now. Moving here to absolutism versus relativism. These are two terms you'll come across in any ethics course pretty much. And absolutism argues there are absolute moral truths, rights and wrongs. Kant is an example. Versus somebody who argues for more relativism, or what's called cultural relativism. And an example I mentioned for you is back at the time of Socrates and Plato, we had philosophers called the sophists, and they argued that. They argued there are no moral truths per se. Each moral situation is based on the context from which it arises, and therefore there are no moral truths. It's culturally relative, in other words. So you can't look at another culture and say, oh, they're being immoral. From their standpoint, they may not be. They may be doing exactly the right thing from their viewpoint. Each context is different. Now, Sam Harris is a 21st century neuroscientist. He graduated with his PhD in neuroscience from UCLA, and he has an interesting argument. He kind of challenges both absolutism and relativism by arguing that not so much there's moral truths, not so much it's all relative, but the goal is to have the person experience a sense of well-being and to flourish. That's the goal. A lot of philosophers from Greco-Roman times like Aristotle and Plato argued that same thing, that flourishing, that living well, that being to the height of your potential, kind of developmental psychology stuff. And he said that when we examine what's going on inside the brain, we examine what's going on in our neurology, it kind of can give us insight to how one is being treated, if they're being treated well, if they're flourishing. If we see cases where, this is kind of complicated to do on the first presentation, so I apologize for that. But and we'll cover this in lesson plan 6 under neurophilosophy. But if we see cases where by examining the neurology, by examining the brain state, there's certainly cases of somebody being abused, it's obviously a sign that person should not be abused. I mean, there's certain clarity we have by looking at what's going on inside the brain state of a human being. If we witness the brain state flourishing and the person's flourishing, they're being treated well. If they're being abused, that will show certainly in terms of neurological studies. So we can use almost brain studies for us to give us insight of how to act in the world. I don't know if that all made sense, but we'll cover it later. Okay. Moral stages. So I mentioned developmental psychology, and one of our famous ones here is Lawrence Kohlberg. And Lawrence Kohlberg is a name you'll come across almost in any psychology class. And he has this understanding there's 6 moral stages, and it can kind of be broken into 3 major ones: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Pre-conventional, and I do want to end within about 6-7 minutes because I wanted this to only be 30 minutes long. Pre-conventional is kind of I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. It's more, you're always concerned about avoiding punishment or, being acknowledged and rewarded. You're focused on the authoritarian, mom said this, or the teacher said this, or the president said this, so I have to act this way. Self-serving, where I'm always interested in, benefiting from those actions. That's pre-conventional. Conventional morality is people now are, well, they're kind of conforming more, and they're really wanting to focus more on law and order and doing one's duty. But post-conventional is really focusing not just on following the rules and law and order, but really being concerned about fairness, about justice, about compassion, about what's called the golden rule, about the social contract. Categorical comparative is a term that we'll run across when we cover Kant, and he basically argued that universalize your action. Ask yourself, how would the world be if everybody, categorical means everybody, imperative means everybody acts this way. And if it gives you kind of through asking that question, it gives you an insight whether the world would be better off or worse. And it gives you an insight whether those actions should be followed through or not. And so the fair and justice, it kind of gives you a sense, how would the world be if everybody did it? It gives you a real sense of fairness and justice of that action, and whether one, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's imagine, you accidentally unlock your car and you go into a store and somebody walks by and sees your car unlocked and is tempted to go in and steal your wallet, or I guess you have your wallet because you're in the store, but your iPhone that you left on the seat. And the person then has that dilemma, do I go in, do I steal, or do I not? But if they took that action and universalized and see, how would the world be if anytime somebody turned their back, somebody's ripping them off? It's a horrible world. So it kind of gives us insight by asking that question and universalizing it, how would the world be? It gives you an insight about kind of how to act in the world. So the post-conventional kind of really focuses on social contract, fairness and justice, compassion, and so forth. Okay, the moral circle idea I've already covered, but it's not a circle of which you're saying, these are the people I love in the circle. It's more the circle of which you ask yourself, are my actions impacting them? The answer is going to be yes, because any action you do really impacts those around you and those even larger than that. And do you care about that? I mean, is that part of your moral concern? And so if it is, then they're part of your moral circle. And the more expansive the moral circle, the better it is for the world, for the planet, for you. That's the argument. Now, I have a reading, a small little one-pager on the difference between empathy and compassion. I thought that was a cool article here. And it really highlights that there's a big difference between empathy and compassion, even though they sound very similar. Empathy is feeling sorry for somebody, right? And it brings you pain to see what they're going through. Compassion is acting upon it and not feeling sorry, doing something about it. And so there is a big distinction between those. And I thought that was kind of a cool article that highlighted that. Compassion is one of positivity. Compassion makes you happy because you help out. And then it makes the other person happy because they're receiving the help. Where empathy is two people are actually miserable, the person experiencing it and the person observing it. Okay, so I thought that was a neat one. Okay, so required readings, if you click here. Okay, a lot of what I'm talking about is what is ethics, the 3 branches of ethics. The moral stages is the Kohlberg article. And then this is the moral circle idea. It starts off with you, friends and family, living humans, future generations, non-human animals, all living things, ecosystems, the planet, etc. So the more you expand out that circle of moral consideration, the more you care about how your actions impact beyond your little I self there, the better off the world is, the better off you are, and the higher developmental stages of morality one would attain is the argument. Okay, so Peter Singer's moral argument, circle argument, is here, and I wanted you to read that, and then the difference between empathy and compassion. Okay, so that's the reading. Let's click out of that. Film watching, I'm trying to finish this within 30 minutes. The TED Talks I offered, they're all very good. I think I might have mentioned that I did have a favorite. I shouldn't bias you. A lot of people love the Barry Schwartz one. Excellent. He does just such a good job, okay? And it's called Wisdom and Morality, and it's very good. It's a TED Talk. This one, Michael Burrows, he also does the significance of ethics in education. That's also good. But I really like the Sean Anker one. I think that's a little bit more of my favorite. And his focus is on happiness and how to attain happiness. And one of the key ingredients is moral action. And so I thought that was really cool. It fits with the philosophy of Aristotle. Aristotle focuses a lot on happiness. And they call, the word for happiness in Greek is eudaimonia. And eudaimonia means flourishing or living well. I mentioned that a few times. So, you know, the concept of living well and flourishing, eudaimonia, or attaining happiness, and that morality is that necessary ingredient to get there. So I think that is a wonderful presentation he gives. And then there's these 3 smaller films, just highlighting some key things of what ethics is all about. And what I think this one is a crash course. A lot of students like those. And then moral circle. There seems to be a confusion. As I've taught this class a few times, well, not a few times, I've used the moral circle for quite some time now. And it seems some students get it, it just clicks with them, and some students just don't get it. And they say, my moral circle is my wife, my moral circle is my kid. And that's not what we're talking about. Of course you love them, and of course they're in your moral circle, but is that it? Then everybody else you're kind of flipping off and saying, screw you. No, don't you think about your neighbors? Don't you think about, so it's that concept of how far out do you extend that thinking about and wondering how you consider them in your moral consideration. Do you realize your actions impact them, and what would you, would you change your actions in light of that? So that moral circle. Okay, so I highly recommend taking notes. What do I say here when watching the films? It's a good one because that way you don't have to rewatch them. And then you have a post question. And let me just click, since I have 1 minute left. This is a big explanation of what posts are. So once you understand what a post is, you never have to look at that again. And there's always going to be 2 bullets, but it's still 1 post. You answer, half a page and half a page. And you write it as 2 sections because it's easier for the student to read it, your classmates, and it's easier for me to read it. And one is just really explain his article that I assigned. And it's one of those articles I mentioned. It's right in there, Peter Singer's Moral Circle one. Explain the article. And I say to give some examples from the reading, because that's, that's a really good way to say, hey, I read it. Look, I'm showing these cool examples. And then applying the moral circle to you. And again, it's a lot more than just your immediate who do you love and who do you consider. But I ask you, for instance, who is in your moral circle? Now, again, your moral circle may be very limited right now. Hopefully at the end of the semester, you've expanded it out. But do other countries, are they part of it? Are animals part of it? Are other insects part of it? Does the environment, do you ever think about them? Do you think about the future generations and how your actions impact them? And if, most likely we're going to say no to some of these. So what would Peter Singer think about it? Would he ask you to expand it out? And if so, what might you do to expand it out? And it's not about giving away all your money in your bank account to help the poor. It's little things that you can do. And you can mention some of those. So what might you do to expand that moral circle? So just some thoughts to think about. And I'm trying to always take the post question and relate it back to you, because I don't want it just to be a I say no regurgitation of ideas, but sometimes I do ask for specifics. Showing me and illustrating you've watched the films and done the reading is excellent. But then I always like in the second bullet somehow to connect it back to your thoughts and what you've learned from it. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope this presentation added some clarity, and I will try to do at least a 30-minute or a little less of a Zoom every time we hit a lesson plan. And so next week we have a lesson plan, or I'm sorry, the second lesson plan on morality. I'm sorry, the moral, I'm tired. The moral ethical heroes. We will have one on that. I will end it now, and thank you for listening. Namaste. As I click out, how am I going to stop share and end the meeting?